afternoon and welcome to this hour where we will talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My name is Emil Briggs. I'm director of the Vienna School of International Studies. It's an honor and pleasure to work with the Austrian Oriental Society Hammerburgstal together for this hour. It's my pleasure to say welcome to our speaker, Susanna Terstal. Welcome. Susanna Terstal is since September 2018 EU Special Representative in the MENA region and also member of the Middle East Quartet. Maybe you would like to say also something about the situation with the Middle East Quartet. And I also can welcome an alumni of the Diplomatische Akademie Peter Kreuz, who will moderate this afternoon. From my side, only actually really one sentence, because I was challenged by the title of this hour. The title is Conflict at the Crossroads, What Role for the EU? Both elements are a challenge for me because there seems to be always crossroads in this Israeli-Palestine conflict. So what is really new at this situation? And in most of these crossroads, the Americans are involved. Again, what is new at these crossroads? And the second part of the title, what role for the European Union? I don't want to be a pessimist, but as we know, it is very difficult, first of all, to have a common position of the European Union on many of the issues we discuss. Maybe this will change if radical things happen in the region or in and around Israel in the future. So that's why I'm looking forward, but the title is a repetition of what we know already in this conflict or what is really new. But actually, that's all I wanted to say. I give the floor to Professor Prochaska from the organizers from the Hammerburgstal Society.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Susanna Terstal on behalf of the Austrian Oriental Society Hammerburgstal, which is a very well established and old association that is dedicated to the spread of the knowledge on the Middle East and North Africa. And now allow me very briefly to say a few words on Susanna Terstal, who, as we have already heard, has been for about 2 years the EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. Susanna Terstal can look back on a long and very successful career. She is an extremely polyglot person who studied at numerous universities in the Netherlands, in the United States, and in Italy. She studied law, political sciences, international relations, and also Italian philology. In the early 1990s, she began her career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and she was mainly working in European issues. But in 2012, she was posted to Angola as the Dutch ambassador. And before she has reached her present position, she was for about 4 years the Dutch ambassador in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So she knows, I think. She knows very well the Middle East also from inside. And yes, since 2 years, she has been the EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. That means that she actively supports and contributes to negotiations between the two parties, between the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And now I would like to say that we are very happy to have you here for this hour, and we are looking forward to hear what you can tell us about these negotiations.
As a moderator for this meeting, I would like also to welcome all participants, especially our guest today, the EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process, Susanna Terstal, and I would like to invite her for her presentation and give her the floor. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. And let me first react to what Ambassador Briggs said. I agree with you. This conflict seems to be often at the crossroads. Yeah. But now things seem to be going faster than in the first part of my mandate. So that's why we thought it would be an apt title. And it is my pleasure to be addressing you today. I really wish I could have been there in person. That was the original plan. But yeah, due to Corona, as we all know, this is not possible. As an EU envoy, my job is twofold. I represent the EU in the region for everything related to the peace process. But equally important, I work closely with the member states and help build consensus within Europe on the very delicate issues surrounding the Middle East peace process. I have visited over half of the EU capitals to understand what the drivers are for the national positions on the conflict. And as a result, I can see how every country in Europe has a story that links it to the current conflict in the Middle East, such as what happened to its own Jewish population, the experience of occupation, or other national experiences. The conflict between Israel and the Palestinians resonates in Europe in a way that is different from other places in the world. As a haven for the Jewish people fleeing persecutions and death in Europe, Israel has a special significance for most European countries. In a speech given in 2018 in Jerusalem, Chancellor Kurz declared that the Austrian government viewed both the fight against anti-Semitism and the security of Israel as part of his country's Staatsräson. The creation of Israel is a part of European history. Therefore, we have a responsibility to ensure that Israelis can live in peace and security, and that Israel is recognized and integrated in the region. At the same time, European countries bear a responsibility towards the Palestinian people and other Arab nations. They are the former colonial powers who drew most of the borders in the region and authorized the migration of Jewish refugees to British-mandated Palestine. I know that Austria enjoys a good relationship with the Palestinian Authority and other Arab states. Your academy was established with the purpose of teaching Oriental languages like Turkish, Arabic, and Persian to diplomats of the Habsburg Empire. It's a testimony to the strong role that Austria played as a bridge between Europe and the Middle East. For Europe today, like for the Europe of yesterday, what happens around the Mediterranean and beyond the Strait of Bosphorus is of strategic interest. As recent crises showed again, instability in the Middle East inevitably has a spillover effect in Europe. Finding peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians will not resolve all conflicts in the Middle East, but it will remove a strong obstacle to regional peace and suppress a powerful driver of radicalization all over the Middle East and in Europe too. But let me now turn to the main topic of the presentation, the state of play in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today, and the title, which says that the conflict is at a crossroads. And indeed, we are at a moment in time when the situation on the ground could change radically. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced his intention to take steps towards annexation of parts of the West Bank. This could start already the 1st of July. It is part of the coalition agreement with his coalition partner Benny Gantz. Such steps will have a devastating effect for the possibility of peace between Israelis and Palestinians, for the stability in the region, and for the credibility of the international rules-based system that we all benefit from. Since the end of the Cold War, most of the international community, including the EU and all its members, but also the United States, has taken a clear and consistent stance on the need for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. From the beginning, it was a consensual and constructive attitude based on foreign policy realism and at the same time based on international law, which brings obligation for both parties to the conflict, notably the Fourth Geneva Convention. In the course of the 1990s, with the launch of the Oslo process, a strong majority of Israelis and Palestinians came to see the creation of two states as the best solution to end decades of conflict between them. The horrific violence of the Second Intifada, continuing settlement expansion, and a change in the regional balance of power have eroded that belief. Yet, until very recently, the two-state solution had the support of a majority of Palestinians and Israelis. Over the last 2 years, a series of decisions have shaken the Oslo framework to its core. The decision by the US to recognize Jerusalem as capital of Israel has broken with the consensual position of the international community that Jerusalem is an issue that parties need to agree on through negotiations. The US announced finally its vision for peace in January. Our assessment is that it departs fundamentally from the international parameters that have been established as the cornerstone of any long-standing solution to the conflict. At the same time, as High Representative Borrell has said, it can be used as a catalyst to restart negotiations. The goal of the EU and its member states was always the creation of a viable and contiguous Palestinian state through negotiations. This is not what is in the US plan. The state foreseen in the US plan will not be an independent state, nor will it be viable. What nation can accept to have no control over its main resources, over its borders, its airspace and territorial waters, and be unable to decide on its economic policy? What government can accept overriding power over security from another state on most, if not all, of its territory? Israeli security concerns are real, but permanent control over another people cannot be the solution to it. After all, peace is only sustainable if it respects the rights of all people. The plan does not foresee a contiguous state either. All existing settlements are recognized and will fall to Israel, including the Jordan Valley. This is occupied Palestinian territory outside the 1967 borders. When the Israeli government talks about extending its sovereignty, and we call this annexation, it is precisely the areas that in the US plan would be part of Israel. This unilateral action of annexation takes the US plan as its basis, and the Israeli government is looking for US approval. This would set a dangerous precedent. The acquisition of territory by force is explicitly forbidden by the UN Charter, to which we are all parties. The UN Charter is a cornerstone of the functioning of international relations in today's world. What would that mean for other conflicts in the world? International law protects the small parties and guarantees peace. We must not let the rule of the strongest prevail again. This is also the premise for our own existence in the European Union. The possibility of annexation raises other questions linked to the human rights dimension of this conflict. Neither the Israelis nor the Americans have yet clarified what is to happen in the long run to the Palestinians in the rest of the occupied territories, with no hope of a state. Or even what will happen to the Palestinians in the annexed territories. What civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights will they have? Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Palestinians in annexed areas of the Jordan Valley will not receive Israeli citizenship. So what will happen to Palestinians without a Palestinian state and without citizenship? And what about Israeli democracy if it is a state where people have different rights according to their residency or their religion? That is why many people in NGOs and think tanks talk about apartheid. And it also poses the question how Israel can remain a state with a Jewish majority if there is not a separate Palestinian state. Finally, a decision to annex would run the risk of creating more instability in the region. The Palestinian Authority, partly because of its own shortcomings and partly because of continuous occupation, has lost most of its legitimacy. It has failed to agree on terms with Hamas to reunify the Palestinian territory. Annexation would likely remove the possibility of a negotiated settlement for the foreseeable future. This will be an important blow for the PA leadership, whose main political driver has been to obtain a state through peaceful means. It also means that hardliners like Hamas and other militant groups could benefit, because they have said from the beginning that negotiations could lead nowhere. There will also be consequences for Jordan and other neighboring countries. Furthermore, the chance that Israel can make peace with other Arab countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia will be less. They have made this clear in their statements and private messaging. So where does the EU stand here? The EU has clearly said that it will not recognize the annexation of any part of the West Bank. All 27 EU member states agree that annexation would be illegal under international law. Austrian Foreign Minister Schallenberg declared on 30 May that the unilateral expansion of territory is against international law and numerous resolutions of the United Nations Security Council since 1967. The EU and its member states have communicated their concerns to the Israeli leadership and warned that such steps could undermine the positive relationship that Israel currently enjoys with Europe. We are also talking to the Palestinians and our partners in the Middle East Quartet to find a path towards new talks based on the accepted international parameters. To do that, both parties can take steps to rebuild trust. We have seen at the outset of the COVID outbreak how Israel and the PA can work well together. This has saved lives. But let me be clear, our objective cannot be to go back to the status quo of 2 years ago. This was not a tenable situation. Continued occupation of the West Bank is not an option. Lives of the people are deteriorating every day. There cannot be another generation of Palestinians who grow up in Gaza without the possibility to build a future. There cannot be another wave of terror attacks in Israel. We need to break the cycle of violence. Resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be a key to sustainable peace in the Middle East. Israel, the Palestinians, and the countries in the region can flourish on the basis of mutual cooperation. There is still hope. I want to be an optimist. Peace is not only necessary, it is also possible. In Europe, we still celebrate a day in which peace was declared on the continent. We have never forgotten the past. It is what drives us to continue pursuing peace around the world. If we stop believing in this possibility, we are doomed to fail. I thank you and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Terstal, for your presentation. Thank you very much. You put this oldest of all conflicts in the Middle East also in the context of the overall difficult situation that was still compounded by COVID. But you also hinted to it that the two sides actually found a good way of cooperating on the pandemic. And this also is part of probably the reason why you are an optimist ultimately, that there is a way, if there is a will to sort of embark on it. And I would now like actually to invite participants to ask questions.
Two short questions. You mentioned the Middle East Quartet. I mean, it's the first time since a very, very long time that I hear the name, I mean, of the Middle East Quartet. Does it have any role? And I mean, are there meetings, or when was the last meeting? I mean, could you tell us a little bit more? The second question is regarding the Palestinians, the steps of the Palestinians taken by the Palestinians lately and what they mean. Could you perhaps enlighten us? I mean, they said they want to cancel Oslo or whatever. I mean, what exactly does it mean? I mean, they want to keep up the Palestinian Authority, if I understand it correctly, but which part of Oslo do they cancel? What consequences does this have? Does it have any consequences for the participations of the Palestinian Authority to institutions, for example, to UN institutions mostly? Please, if you would be so kind to elaborate. Thank you.
The Middle East Quartet at the level of envoy, so that is my level, we are meeting. Since I'm in this job, we've had several meetings. It is no secret that the UN, the EU, Russia, and the US don't agree on the same things at the moment. This was also clear from my presentation. So we talk to each other, we see what our role can be, we discuss the conflict, but we have not issued any statements. But we are working, so to say. Then steps taken by the Palestinian Authority, they have not renounced Oslo. What they have said is that they see themselves absolved by the obligations towards Israel. Mainly, as they say, Israel is not fulfilling its obligations. And they want to show, to give a signal what could happen if Israel carries out the threat of annexation. Nikolai Mladenov in the Security Council, he clearly described this also as a cry for help. What we see is that the Palestinians are trying very hard to make everybody aware of what annexation would mean for them. Yesterday there was a large a meeting in Ramallah where many of the EU ambassadors were present as well. So this is really, it is not breaking the agreements. It is really not following the obligations of the agreement. It's a legal finesse, but that is what it is.
Thank you for your speech and the introduction. There's some really interesting points in there. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting was when you're listing a list of conditions, and the question is what government can accept these states, but of course Palestinians are already living underneath that context already. And so I think my question to you, and again, we're talking about who's not upholding the restrictions and the obligations of the Oslo Convention, but again, Israel is not upholding those, and we're not seeing any repercussions, clear, visible repercussions. And I appreciate that you're saying that continued occupation of the West Bank is not tenable, but I'd be interested to see how you can see a way to roll back from that, because we're clearly going in the wrong direction. I appreciate that there will be things that you can't tell us in this phone call, but I am interested to understand whether sanctions and repercussions are being discussed, because, and if not, what alternatives might you look at to enforce this strong statement, but something that perhaps might need some, threat of action rather than just words. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but my name's Sarah and I work for Porticus. We're a private foundation. I'm based in Vienna and I manage our peace building and governance work in the MENA region. Thank you.
I understand your question, and this is also what we've been saying. If Israel does not carry out annexation, which we are all trying to prevent, also for the reasons I said, especially because it could have very much a destabilizing effect in what is going on in the Middle East. We should not be content with the status quo. And when I started this job two years ago, we were really trying not to make to reverse the trend of this deteriorating situation on the ground. If you look at the violence coming from Gaza towards Israel, I've been in southern Israel as well and visited some of the kibbutz very close to Gaza. Once I couldn't go to Gaza myself because rockets were coming out of Gaza. What is happening in the West Bank with continued violence of settlers against Palestinians, and especially the impossibility of Palestinians to go to their own fields and harvest. We all read about olive trees being destroyed. That is not a situation that can go on forever. So what we're clearly trying to do is what High Representative Borrell said when the plan came to the table. Let's use this as a catalyst to come back to negotiations, to restart negotiations. Because what happened before the American plan came to the table at the end of January, basically everything was paralyzed because we all knew an American plan was coming. And the conventional wisdom is you cannot have peace or peace talks without the Americans on board. And of course, there's a lot of truth in that. I don't see how that would come about either. So hence the work in the quartet. So this is really what we are working for.
Thank you very much for this answer. If there are more questions, of course, please do not hesitate. Now is the opportunity. I see Camille Ceris-Quesson from Agence Europe. Please, you have the floor.
I just want to know, is it possible and how is it difficult for you to work for the EU in the Middle East as the 27 member states are not really agreeing on the same thing about the conflict and about the resolution of the conflict? Because you were saying 27 are agreeing about the illegal annexation under the international law, but I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were not able to have only one EU declaration on the subject. At the end, it was Mr. Borrell declaration, but not the EU declaration. Thank you very much.
I said in the beginning of my presentation, for me from the start, it was very clear that it is important to work together with the member states and not only go to the Middle East and talk to the parties and other Arab countries and the US and Russia and the UN because of the quartet. We are 27 member states. We all have a different past and experience, but we also share a lot. And what we have to be careful with from the outside, it is in the interest of some to stress the differences, because if we don't agree, then it seems to make us weaker. But when we work from the inside, we really have to look for what is the consensus, how can we build on that consensus, and from there, how can we move forward? Now, if you look at the discussions in the EU and what you see in press statements and Twitter and of the different leaders within the EU member states, a few things are very clear. We all are we all think that international law is important. We all stick to the parameters of the two-state solution. Jerusalem is capital for two states, the importance of Israeli security, the borders of 1967. That has been always the case, and that is still the case. And from that follows as well that we are all against annexation, because that of course means that the borders of 67 are not valid anymore. Now, there are differences, and the differences are about other things, and I'm not going to give you an insight in all the differences, but usually it has to do by how do we proceed exactly, and these are discussions that we're holding inside the EU, but usually we find a way forward.
Ms. Terstal, I'm working for the Vienna School of International Studies, and my question would be, how do you assess the discussion in Israel on the annexation? Is it a prominent topic in the public debate?
It is very different. First of all, I don't read Hebrew, so I am dependent on what I hear from our delegation and my discussion with the ambassadors, the EU ambassadors in Israel, and what I read in the English Israeli press. It has really taken on a major, since the coalition agreement between Netanyahu and Gantz, since it is clear that this extending of sovereignty is part of the coalition agreement, and especially with the broad international attentions and warnings, it is a debate in Israel. And what I see, there are different groups who are against annexation for different reasons. Already from the start, it was the security establishment that warned for increased violence, difficulty of protecting the borders. This was especially when the plan came out, and you look at the map, the professional map that came with the plan. The border that is there now between Israel and Palestine, the separation border, would be extended 2- or 3-fold. Now, this is very rugged terrain and difficult to control. Then the second group that only in the past weeks became very vocal is the settler community. And they are against it for a very different reason. They are saying extending sovereignty or annexation is the unilateral implementation of an American plan. The American plan still has a two-state solution, and the settlers are in principle against a two-state solution. So working with a plan that has a two-state solution makes that they are against. And then of course there is what is called the Israeli peace camp. They see this as very disruptive for the possibility of a viable two-state solution. So there is opposition in Israel itself as well. The point is, of course, how does this translate in votes in the Knesset? And there, the assessment is that most likely Netanyahu has a majority. So it really depends on how he assesses the risk of annexation. What are the Americans saying about this? We have also read in the newspaper that this week there will be a meeting in Washington, and Ambassador Friedman from Israel, so the American ambassador, he is back in Washington at the moment. So that will be an important sign for Prime Minister Netanyahu as well, is my assessment.
Yes, I have one question, and that is, in your opinion, what is a good solution instead of the annexation of the Jordan Valley, etc.? Because like we know in Lebanon and Syria, as soon as Israel basically let it all go, Iran sent their troops in. And probably most likely this will also happen if it doesn't come to the annexation of the Jordan Valley. And I think that is probably why Israel is leaning towards this option, because they're afraid of Iran sending their troops and the whole thing happening again. So in your opinion, what would be a solution for that? And because also as far as I know, the Palestinians are also missing a clear leader, and the Gaza is controlled by Hamas, the West Bank is controlled by someone else. So who can Israel really even talk to in case of peace? Thank you.
No, the Palestinians have a leader, and that is President Abbas. He is the president. There's the Prime Minister, Staya. So there are people to talk to. There's the PLO negotiator. So it should be really clear who are the people to talk to. And we also have to acknowledge that President Abbas has always said we can only have peace through peaceful means. What I see as a danger is not so much what you're describing. What I see is as a danger that if there is annexation, that this peace, that this really is a loss for the Palestinians who are saying, like Abbas, we can only have peace through peaceful means. Because Hamas in Gaza, who is often negotiating with Israel after another round of violence, they then seem to be, or could be seen as more successful than the peaceful means of President Abbas. And there is a fear that in the West Bank, that there will be much more support for parties or movements like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. To my mind, that would be bad news for Israel, because that means absolutely more violence. And of course, it's always very difficult to predict. We never predicted that we would be for 3 months in lockdown already. It only shows how quickly things can change. But this is one of the more conventional ways to look at it.
Maybe if I also may to chip in here, because it touches on the issue. How do you currently see the prospects for inter-Palestinian reconciliation? Because this has been a topic that has been on the news for a long number of years. And of course, it's an issue you have described. There are different approaches to a solution, which doesn't make it easier. So this would be one question, if you would like to answer that. And the other one is, there are, of course, two Arab countries that are very close to Israel, that decided to make peace with Israel in the past, and that are also extremely interested in a peaceful solution in the case of these oldest of all conflicts in the region. How do you see their stance at the moment? Thank you very much.
The prospects for Palestinian reconciliation is a really, really difficult one. Half a year ago, the end of last year, President Abbas in New York in September last year announced that he really wanted to have elections in West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. So from that moment on, basically, there were negotiations between Hamas, Fatah, led by the director of the election committee, to see in which way there could be elections. And they were very close, actually, to an agreement. this could have really helped to move reconciliation forward, because so far the efforts of outsiders, and we really have to recommend Israel and Egypt and many others who have tried and worked hard, and also work hard on maintaining a workable outcome between Israel and Hamas. But there's so many interests at play that nobody has been successful in reconciling Fatah and Hamas. So this election project had a chance, but of course with an American plan on the table, with now the threat of annexation and the state the PA is in, this is not the time to talk about elections, because there are very big worries on the Palestinian side. Of course, when we talk about a two-state solution, it's absolutely necessary, because we don't talk about 3 states. A Palestinian state, West Bank and Gaza together is essential for that. You also asked about Jordan and Egypt. Jordan, the Kim came out really, really strong against annexation, especially, of course, the Jordan Valley, but against annexation per se, because he sees that as very destabilizing. Egyptian diplomacy works differently. They are much more, they're doing much more silent diplomacy, so less with statements, but the statements that they have done, we see the same against annexation, and they're very worried also about their own internal security. What is interesting is the statements and the op-ed that was written by the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates. They were seen as one of the Gulf countries that was closest to Israel. There is an international organization in Abu Dhabi, and Israel is part of that. Of course, the World Expo in Dubai, Israel will have a pavilion. So they have ties with Israel, and they were looking to normalizing the relationship. And now they came out really strong against annexation, and that this would have a real effect on their relationship. This while the same ambassador who wrote an op-ed in Hebrew in an Israeli newspaper, translated in Hebrew, of course, he was one of the ambassadors who were in the room when Trump and with Netanyahu on his side announced the U.S. vision for peace. So these pronouncements by the Arab states, I think, are very important in showing Israel what the possible consequences are of unilateral action in the West Bank.
My name is Alexander Ratziner. I'm working with startups in Europe, but also in Israel. And my question to the ambassador is how does she see the role of Iran and Turkey that is there in MENA in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And I also wanted to ask, is there a number of virulent conflicts going on, quite hot conflicts now in the MENA region, Egypt being engaged in Libya and Turkey being very much engaged in northern Syria and northern Iraq, and having occupied some of the land there, with relatively little reaction from the European Union. How does one square this? On the one hand, this tolerant attitude towards Turkey extending its influence, and this other attitude towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you very much.
The role of Iran and Turkey. I'm not going to go into the role of Iran. I was ambassador there for 3 years. And it's very difficult when you're inside the country to get a clear assessment of what they're doing outside the country. That they are extending their influence, that they're trying to gain foothold everywhere is clear. And you see that as well in Gaza, and that's one of the reasons I'm so worried about it. Turkey, everybody is talking about how Turkey is extending its influence, but my main concern, or my job, is the Middle East peace process, which until not so long ago was only the Palestinians and Israelis. And as I said as well, some still call it the mother of all conflicts in the Middle East. I'm not so sure about that. There are regional tensions, for instance, also if you look at the tension between Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Iran and the Gulf states, that are really very important for the stability of the region. But by solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, you take a conflict off the table, which has been going on now for a very long time, and which has been used by many as a pretext for violence in the region. So it might not be anymore the mother of all conflicts, but it's definitely a conflict that, when solved, will help in bringing success in solving other issues. I leave it at that.
Why the EU did not propose a peace initiative? Because the United States put forward peace plan outside international law, or supported President Abbas' peace initiative. The question is why the EU did not propose a peace initiative to peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
The EU has the international parameters, or the EU parameters, which I mentioned before and which are quite clear. We are all bound by international law, and we always say it has to be direct negotiations between the parties. Through the quartet, we help with that. After Oslo, we have been putting a lot of money in building a Palestinian state. So yeah, that's where we are. I don't think the EU can easily replace the US as the broker for a peace process. We work with the US and Russia and the UN in the quartet, and that is what our role is.
At this point, I would really like to thank you very much, Susanna. Also, if I may, on behalf of the hosts of the Austrian Oriental Society and of the Vienna School of International Studies, for your time and for your effort to be with us. And above all the best for your effort, which is mainly directed at coordinating the EU position and enabling us all together to try to be helpful towards a peaceful solution, as you have described it. Thank you very much indeed. And I would like to thank all the participants for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter.